All right, welcome to another round. Here we go. Hi, Scott. How you doing?
Hi, Jeff. I am good. It's been a funny day.
So, yeah, it's fun doing the show in the middle of the week. So it always feels like once we get past the show, then I know that the rest is gravy. So it's a weird benchmark. So tonight, you and Steve wanted to talk about Sin City. So we're going to talk about Sin City.
It was on the list of all the other things that we could be talking about. And
Yeah.
That one just seemed to ring this week like it was a really good topic to have.
Well, I mean, it's I think it's always a really good topic. It's a pivotal piece of work, right? Like, and then it was nothing like it before, at least not in American comics. And it had such a huge influence not only on the way you drew something and the way you told a story, but the kind of stories that you could tell.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was another one of those branching out times, because it was still quite long ago when superheroes did definitely rule the roost.
Right.
They were still probably at least 90% of the publications that were out there.
Right.
But it did, start breaking down that barrier, which I'm sure is another aspect about it that Frank's super proud of.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a different kind of. I mean, I had seen gangster movies and I'd read Pulp Fictions when I was younger, and I liked the detective stuff and I love that genre. But I'd never seen anything like it done in a comic book. It was quite literally hard boiled, right? It was such a. I mean, Marv is such a crazy cool character, and it's such an intense world that he creates.
Yeah, and the funny thing to me within all of that is, if you told me from the outset of somebody working on some sort of little bit of a gangster book or something like that, I'd have been like, I don't know if I could, and even if you told me Frank Miller was doing it after Daredevil and Dark Knight and all these other great Ronin,
Right.
all these great wins that he'd had, I'd be like, I don't know if I really, but I gave it a shot when it came out at the time. I'm like, oh, I'm sold, because even though I know there's influences of European and South American and everything else in there, still very strongly American to me, and it's so over the top and so larger than life in that genre of crime fiction or whatever, that it translates, I think, easily enough to all sorts of readers.
Well, one of the things too that I wanted to talk about is, like, we are going to show sort of we're not going to do the whole first trade paperback. We're not going to do the whole first story. We're just going to show some of the beginning and some of the end. Because I think one of the things that's most interesting to me is just how you could watch his evolution, when you could see the different choices he was making from when he began the project to when he ended that first trade paperback.
Absolutely, which is one of my favorite aspects of the work of this book, was that, especially because it started as those short stories in Dark Horse Presents. It was a really kind of cool, avant-garde almost way to start that whole thing in this back corner of a anthology book for a smaller publisher, smaller than he'd worked for in forever at that time. But it seemed like he was feeling his way, like he was starting this instead. Maybe I'll do it this way with it. No, maybe I'll do it. I'll push it a little over here. And it was definitely stronger, or at least different. By the very end of it, you could see that he had narrowed it down, his choices of what he wanted this world to look like.
Well, one of the things I really like is it was black and white, but it also,
he was he was inking it himself, he was writing himself, so it's pure Frank.
Absolutely. It would, and even though he had gotten really good color work just previous to this with Lynn Varley or different things at that time, this was another really sharp left-hand turn, which he was becoming famous for at this point. That, Daredevil was so different to what it had been before that, before he made it super popular in one of Marvel's best-selling books. And then he went over and did Batman in a way that no one else had done at that point. And then he left all of that behind. Well, he did Ronin too. And he left all those things behind, and then did the Sin City, which was as different from everything else he'd done before as practically possible. I mean, the only thing it wasn't was that it was fantasy or something else, space opera. It was still crime fiction, but but man, totally different. And here we have this whole opening sequence that, again, he wouldn't have been able to do really for Marvel or DC at that time. I mean, maybe some sort of mature readers DC book or Vertigo or something like that, but I don't know if that was even around at that time.
I'm assuming that the Dark Horse was not Comics Code at the time, right?
Nah.
Yeah.
I don't know if Dark Horse was ever Comics Code.
Well, that's good. That freed Frank up. So obviously this page, this opening page, we have this. We'll start here, right? And then this is sort of the first page. And one of the things I love about this is it's just a great page in itself. But look how skinny Marv is, right? So that's if we look at Marv, and then the Marv later on, they are not the same guy. Like so, we get
not
to
at
watch
all.
Not even close, right? So we get to watch him experiment with his main character. Like, and I really think it's interesting too, because as the story unfolds and expands, I think the character of Marv unfolds and expands and becomes much. You were saying he's larger than life and he's more graphic, right? His actions become more graphic and his face becomes more graphic, and you really get that almost cartooned version.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, this is where he is towards the end, all this broad-shouldered and crazy. Look how big those hands are. Yeah, exactly that one. Versus the ones you were just showing me, those first panels. And again, I love all that stuff. That's like, to me, we get to see into Frank's mind as he's putting all this together.
Right. Well, yeah, one of the things I love about this book is it's an experiment on what you need to see. Like it's just, it gives you what's important, and he sort of blacks out the rest, or doesn't even doesn't bother to draw, but doesn't show it to you. Like he lets your mind fill it in. Right. So he just gives you the elements that are important for that story. So he pared down the writing, and he also just pared down the drawing. It's kind of a visual poetry.
Absolutely. And then, in these panels as well, but with many of them, he really turned it into his signature on this stuff, the way that he would use hair or use drapery or use jackets or coats or different things, of how much movement they'd get, or even his cars.
Mm-hmm.
But look at all the movement in those panels.
Right. Yeah,
there is incredibly static images of stuff.
There's a lot of action.
You and I have had to work on similar subject matter a couple different times. We're like, how are we going to make this work? How are we going to make this into something? Frank did it here, 100%.
I failed when I was trying to do the more romantic stuff, quote unquote. I did not do it very well. I did not capture that sense.
Well, I mean, and even though we're seeing this stuff growing as the pages go along, and it really becomes its own beast as it continues on. Mm-hmm. I'll bet you there's still within pages. He probably drew that first scene that was so explicit. He probably drew that 10 times or thumbnailed it out like 20 times trying to come up with it, because I bet you for him, at least as far as I know of his published history or anything else, he had never probably drawn anything like that either.
Oh, right. Yeah, because he'd done so much mainstream stuff.
And having such fame and whatnot before this, between Daredevil, Dark Knight, all these different things, mm-hmm. He probably had weeks where he didn't have to worry about a paycheck or anything else going on. And he was just like, I'm going to try another version. I'm going to try another version. I'm surprised that we haven't seen these other versions come out, if I'm guessing correctly. But
I would love to see the initial thumbnails, right, as he was writing the story, as he was working it out.
Yeah.
To see how much the writing changed along with the art.
Mr. Bill wants to know where the doctor is tonight.
Oh, well, so Steve has laryngitis and his voice is trashed. And he knew that if he came on, this book, doing this episode was sort of his idea. And so I think he knew that he wouldn't be able to not use his voice.
We talked to him yesterday and I could hear the cracking in there. I'm like, oh no, Steve's voice.
Yeah. He might still pop in for a little bit, but he most likely won't. Yeah. Right. So look how normal. I mean, there's Marv.
Yep.
And then there's Marv.
I mean, the face and hairdo are fairly consistent through most of it.
Right.
But even still, like you said here, even that face, that is not the broad, almost thick-necked, 6'4", 200 some pound Marv that we're used to by the end.
Yeah, he's not the force of nature yet that he becomes, right? He's not carved in stone the way he does in the way he is in later issues.
Yep.
Which I have to say, like, I always get to, I mean, I was working on my own creator own book of the day, and I kept referencing my own character designs to make sure that I was doing it right. I
Yes.
wondered, like, why am I doing that? This is my character. I can draw him any way I want. And yet I trapped myself. I built my own cage. And I just think it's funny that how you do that without thinking about it, which is one of the reasons I love this book, is because he experiments basically on stage, right? He's out there without a net, just kind of going for it, which I really appreciate.
Yep, I absolutely agree. This is such an experimental, fun thing as this story went along. I don't even think that he really had the ending of whatever the story was. I think he just kind of let it play out, or maybe halfway through he had it or something like that. But
Interesting.
as it starts off, it's just such an opening vignette almost of this story that it could go anywhere from here.
Right. Yeah, like you don't see it coming. Right? It does. It's just, this is sort of like what's going on. Who
I
is
love that page. I love the heart shaped and everything about it. So good.
So you were saying that some of the art style might have been influenced by Breccia, this guy?
Right. Alberto Breccia is what I have looked up and seen that Frank credits him as definitely an influence of that time, that he had seen a lot of this. And we had more that I wasn't able to unload, but a bunch of it, not all of it. Some of it to me, it looks more like, who's the guy who did that? I think he's also South American or Central American. Block 13, Cinder Block 13.
Oh, Sofrino?
What's that?
Sofrino?
I think I've seen other stuff of this guy's work, Breccia's work, that looks like Jorge's work. But very, illustrative in a black and white brush pen, whatever method. But then a bunch of it was like this. It was very high contrast and beautifully set up and very strongly staged, that kind of stuff.
Well, there's just such solid inking techniques, right? It's the art is made with the brush. It's not the little ballpoint pen that I use, or just a pencil line. It's got a bold life of its own.
It does, although with Breccia's stuff, there's always, even as graphic as it gets with the trees and stuff here, there's always hints with that scarf or something on the jacket that there's still some textures usually involved. He doesn't eliminate all of them. And as we can see here, as Frank goes along, he pretty much eliminates almost all of the textures that you can imagine. Cloth can still feel different than, car chrome or something like that in Frank's world, but he's not usually going for too many subtleties of texture in a lot of this.
Yeah, he really keeps turning up the contrast as the story goes on. Like there is some shading and there is some just non-straight black line in some of this earlier stuff. But then as we get further on, he cuts that stuff out.
Yeah, in fact,
like you look in the staircase here, like there's definitely some you can see the texture and the cottage cheese on the walls.
Right. I think he was doing some of that fingerprint playing around with stuff of how to put on ink with your fingerprint sometimes to get a little bit of a weird thing going on.
Right.
But yeah, for the most part, he didn't want to do that. And in fact, later on in those Sin City books, he specifically wasn't adding anything more to it that way in a black and white form. Remember, he started adding color. One of the books would have red as a spotted thing, the dame with the red dress or whatever kind of thing. And then that yellow bastard. So every once in a while, we just get the color yellow. So he was even playing with getting back into color with it.
Yeah, that was a fun little bit of Rumblefish focus. Yes, son Geraldo is amazing too.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, here's face start. I mean, this is almost like Marv is still a human.
But he's starting to look a little thicker. The hand that's grabbing the pills and everything, it's starting to get a little beef to it. It's like he's hulking up while he takes his medicine.
I mean, that's an interesting way to think about it, right? So like, at one point when I remember reading these when they were coming out before I knew where stuff was going. And I remember having a conversation with someone else who was reading, was like, whether this was a delusion that he was going on. That he was that none of this was real and that he was just having a psychotic break. And I always thought that was an interesting take. Like, is this not real? Is this all in his head?
It absolutely could have been. Frank should have turned on the last page or last chapter or whatever and said, like, nope, he's still, locked up somewhere or whatever.
Right.
Oh, I love these.
Yeah.
And we also can't ignore the fact that beyond the black and white of Frank's, what he's been doing with layouts and his figure work and his dramatization and all that kind of stuff, he's also lettering this.
Yeah.
Lettering all this by hand, all the sound effects, everything else going on with it. He's doing all of it in this case. He took it all under his wing for that stuff. And I love the fact that of what he does with this, the placement of them, the kind of shapes and stuff that he uses for the lettering. It has such great grit to it, and it has its own unique quality, similar to the fingerprint of his drawings or even his writing style.
It definitely creates a complete whole. The whole universe is the Frank vision, right? Do you know what size he worked on doing these? Was it 11 by 17 or was it smaller?
I assume it was still 11 by 17. I don't think I've ever seen original of this, but I never heard that they were smaller. Usually I think when an artist has done that, I've become aware at some point. Somebody shares those stories that they've done it smaller. Like when Byrne did Namor. I don't know if he started that way, but definitely by the end of his Namor run or whatever, I even think I saw some of those pages at Marvel at the time. He was drawing them just comic book size.
Yeah, but here, on the staircase, he definitely starts to. If you look back at this first version of the staircase, right, how much extra work? I mean, it's not extra, but additional work there is in the staircase and the wall and the textures. And then we get to this staircase, and he's cut a lot of that out. He's simplified. Even that's just a couple pages. So I wonder if he was looking at that one and decided that he didn't have to do it, that he could do without it. Like he could let the reader fill that stuff in, or that if it was just extraneous to the story.
Absolutely. And it could be, related to those specific influences that he felt at some point, like as he was doing this, that he felt like he was trying to emulate that too much, or he was thinking too much in that pattern. But when it came to it and he started getting his speed on, which I imagine he did as the pages went, probably the more he did them, the faster they were coming out. Excuse me, because he'd already be in the flow of it. And I'll bet you all of that linked together would have pushed him to, do that almost Alex Toth thing of eliminating this, eliminating that. Anything that's extraneous you don't need, take it out.
Right. And also, I've always found that it takes a little while. It takes at least 10 pages to get into a product. To where you get comfortable with the character, you get comfortable with what you're doing.
Yep.
Yeah.
This one was one of those pages that absolutely just blew my mind when I saw it in a way, because it was so really powerful and graphic and everything else. I think I've tried 3 or 4 different times now of studies of it. When I'd have somebody breaking through a window in a comic book in a story, I'd be like, can I do something like this? Can it be that cool?
Yeah. Can I make it this pure?
Yep.
Yeah, I definitely reading this up. So I've read this thing a ton of times, and I even did it. We used to have a comic book club here in my little town, and we. Oh, nice.
Here's, by the way.
Excellent. I just have water. That's boring. We covered this book, and people who had never read a comic before, I think, were swept along by the power and the speed of the images.
Oh, it's fun. It's powerful. Yeah, and it flows. It's one of those, to me, that you'd see those back cover recommendations saying it's a page turner. You can't put it down.
Right. Well, I mean, very much like those old detective novels. Those things zipped by.
Yep. And I think it's actually half the fun of the books we talk about half the time. Like here, I was mentioning before that this was my week time reading for fun stuff. But almost every page that's on there, when you get to the last panel, they have the page turner. They have the thing of, Robin's looking off panel. What is he looking off panel at? Or somebody's doing something, and you need to juice the story that way. I think it makes it fun that way for any reader to come in. Then, then they don't get bored.
So I want to. So this is one of the things I noticed looking at it again for the umpteenth time. But all of the perspective, like the 1 point perspective, that he's falling basically down into a pit.
Yeah.
Right. But that happens a lot in this story. It's a repetitive theme, not repetitive, but it's a repeating theme. So there's another one. There's one right in the beginning where they're in the bed.
Yeah.
Right. There's that. So it's all that directly over the head shot.
Yep.
Is not something that is easy to pull off, and he uses it over and over again. So I think it has to mean something, right? It has to be this sense of being pulled down into the depths.
Pulled down and being disturbing. It's not an angle that, you know, normally people, you don't see that, you don't feel that, and that isn't in your day-to-day life of how you do things. So it's going to be that abrupt thing of like, whoa, what's happening here?
Yeah. Well, because it is unmoored. Like your own perspective is almost always right next to the wall or looking over. You're never just in free fall. But this whole book is about free fall.
Yep.
Yeah. So when was he working on? So we're going to talk about Jeff Darrow later, but was he working on Hard Boiled with Jeff Darrow at the same time as he was doing this, or did that come a little bit later?
I thought Hard Boiled came first.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, by just like a couple of years maybe. I forget. There was something else. Electra Assassin was about this time.
Mm-hmm.
That graphic novel, which also has a lot of artistic connections to what's happening here in Sin City, especially the beginning of Sin City. But no, I'm pretty sure that Hard Boiled was before this, because I remember even thinking at that time that I was wondering how much of a Hard Boiled or whatever was going to leak in here, because you had the main hero in a trench coat and that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, the scene where he's busting through the glass seems like a very Jeff Darrow-y image. So I just wonder if they were talking to each other about stuff, if there was any cross-pollination, or if it's just
there probably was, because even if Hard Boiled was before this, and I think it was, they continued working together. It wasn't long after this that they did their Big Guy and Rusty the Robot.
Oh yeah, that was great too.
That was all around this time in the 90s. This was like 91, I think.
Yeah, this came out in 91. Yeah, that was a good era.
And it was an amazing turn of events for Frank too. You know, you think about those different times that you talk about, like the Kirbys or whatever, that Kirby did great stuff in the Golden Age in the 40s or whatnot with Captain America. And then he did interesting stuff in the 50s with his romance books, or I forget, the Westerns or the Boys Ranch, or all those different kind of things that he was reinventing himself as something completely different. And then Marvel came around in the 60s and he reinvented himself again as almost this third incarnation of Jack Kirby.
Mm-hmm.
Here, Frank Miller was pretty much doing the same thing. He had his Daredevil life. That's very different from his career in Batman and those kind of books that were going on.
Right.
And then he threw in Ronin for a second. That was very different. And then this, but this has continued on. Sin City's been a thing off and on for 30 some years now.
Right.
And it was a whole nother reinvention of him and his style. He used the style also in 300 kind of thing, but he's reinvented himself at least those 3 times just in the comic industry. And it's almost always been to, you know, a really powerful effect and a big seller and popular and everything else.
Well, he seems to be able to choose the style or develop a style that is specifically appropriate for whatever kind of story he's telling. Which I've always wondered about that process. Does he get the idea for the style first, or the idea for the story first?
Right.
Or is it somehow like, if you're going down this road, those things are sort of organically created together?
And this is one of those pages, the one you have right now. This is one of those turning points where he's specifically choosing not to show you the entire brick wall. He's only showing you the little bit that's in shadow around him, and he's leaving the rest of the page white. We've never seen anybody do that in an American comic book at that time.
No. Yeah, no, it's the photo negative aspect of it was, so you really just like, in my mind, I fill in the rest of those bricks, right? Like,
yeah,
there is that pattern there that I can't help but sort of see, even though he's making me do the work, which I think is great, because now I'm very invested. And
I'm looking for a ledge that his hand's grabbing on. Like, the ledge is there. It's right there. I'm sure I can see it.
Right. Yeah.
And then right back to film, crime noir, interior stuff.
I love the blinds, the silhouetted blinds. It's such a great tool.
That 4th panel, man, is just magic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I've always loved the Band-Aids in that last panel on his face, just how many nicks and cuts he has.
Well, and that was, I think, one of those another turning points, like you're saying, as Marv's going along here, is that once he found this Band-Aid idea, and he came upon it, he was like, oh, I've got to use this all over the place. And
Right. All right. So here's
covers and different images, and it really became, like, Doctor Strange's cowl is like, you can't picture the character without them.
Yeah, I mean, look at that. So look at the difference. That's Marv. That's Marv. Right? It's just he's just growing so much. And this is only, where are we at? Right here. It's just another 10 or so pages.
Yeah.
But he's covered a lot of ground in the story and in his artistic development and his development of the character.
Yeah, did we get to, okay, we're on the third short story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What I love too about the Bandit, apart from just a great graphic, is it just shows how tough he is, because in any superhero book, any standard comic book, you don't show, like, if a character gets punched through a wall, you don't really show all the splinters and the cuts and the little scrapes. Or when someone goes through a window, you don't show how that's all those little pieces of glass are cutting everything as you go past. But here you really get to see, like, he must have a ridiculous pain threshold if he feels pain at all.
Well, and it is magic in a way too, because of exactly what you're talking about. It looks like there's only 9 chapters, but yeah, the last couple chapters become full length. Mm-hmm. Around the same time, I remember thinking about that as I was trying to work on my samples or whatever else I was piecing together, going like, yeah, but when they get hurt, they should have, the same cut for the rest of this episode or wherever it goes on before this issue's done. So it's kind of, all those things. And here's one of those breaking points to me, though, is that, like, was Wonder Woman, George Perez's Wonder Woman, like number 5 or 4, in the middle of that Ares storyline that he started with, that first whole arc. I think she gets attacked by the suns, and one of the suns has those snake tendrils or whatever, almost like Ordon thing coming.
Right.
And in one of those pieces of story, and it bites the crap out of her and scratches her. And George continued that for like the next 2 issues until she gets healed at the end of the Ares storyline. Wonder Woman's got these scratches all over her for the rest of it, and it hit me as a artist breaking in. I was like, that doesn't look so good when you've got issue after issue after issue of Wonder Woman all scraped up. I went,
right.
It was defeating its purpose. It wasn't giving you the great. It was actually kind of like turning me off, going like, yeah, but that's not the powerful effect. But these Band-Aids, these are cool. They're graphic. They tell that story of all the injury and everything else. But yet, for him, they really add something to him going on. Whereas Wonder Woman's case, I felt like it took something away from her.
Interesting. Do you think that's the difference in the way the graphic was represented? Like her perfection was scratched, whereas Marv's, like, he's already just such a piece of stone that stuff on him gives him a little bit of a pattern.
A little bit of a pattern, but like you said, I mean, it adds to his manliness or gusto or whatever you want to talk about. I'm like, look at all the injuries, and he's just fine. Just put Band-Aids all place. I'm bleeding, but who cares?
Yeah, it does not seem to even notice.
No, he barely. She mentions, I think, something in there. His therapist. She mentioned something about all the Band-Aids going, "Oh my God, Marv," and he's like, "Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. It's not important." Yeah. It's really, really great. Yeah, this is another just fantastic silhouettes.
Yeah, but here already you can tell Frank he's in second, third gear already.
Mm-hmm.
He's past the early, doing this, a little bit of that, whatever, playing with it. Because, I mean, it's also the magic of how he gets to cheat with this stuff. And the first panel, that window is like literally right up on the roof. There's nothing. There's nothing on the ceiling of that room inside.
Yeah.
But it looks really cool when it's played out that way.
And it does pull you down into that bottom panel in a way.
And he doesn't play in the second panel, the window, or if that's the cast light of the window that's on the side wall or whatever. It's not interfering with the stairs. It's not interfering with him. It's just a graphic to know the perspective of the stairs that we're climbing.
Yeah, like he doesn't anchor it in any way that you would recognize, but it is totally anchored.
Yeah. One of the first conversations I had with Michael Golden, he was an editor at DC briefly in the early 90s. And sorry. I had some samples with Captain America on. He was fighting the Red Skull, and it was just fun thing, whatever. And I showed the pages to Mike, and he liked generally what was going on. He wasn't going to hire me, but his advice at that time was really smart, and it pertains almost directly to this kind of stuff, or into that Alex Toth kind of thing, especially with light and shade, which I was really pushing on those samples. Mike told me that all of this stuff was really cool, but I wasn't making the shadows work for me. They were working sort of in the logic of the art or the room or whatever I was drawing at the time. But he goes, but you have to make that work for you and for the page and for the graphic and for the narrative and the storytelling. Don't let it boss you around. You have to make it work right, which is what exactly this stuff does. Frankie totally makes it whatever he wants it to be, only for his story.
Right. Like he shows you the shadow that not necessarily the shadow that's appropriate for where the light might be coming from, but it's the shadow that is 100% appropriate for the feeling of that drawing.
Yeah. Marv in that second panel, he's lit by one thing. There's a window behind him that should be lighting up all the rest of it, but it may be, maybe it's not. And he's got the crack of the door behind Marv on the other side as his mom's coming in, just so we can see her feet and have the little creak of the door coming in so he can have the mom introduced. But it doesn't affect anything of the rest of the light and shadow of the, that panel of the page.
Right. And I do really think it's interesting how he is placing his word balloons as part of that black and white graphic continuum. Like it's really, I think it's really brilliant that he did his own lettering, not only because he could control everything, all the compositions and stuff, but they really fit in with every drawing.
Yeah, they super do.
Yeah.
Such great storytelling here.
Yeah, it's brilliant. How the window just fades back. Like his relationship with his mom, that whole part of his life just fades back, smaller and smaller. And even the balloon gets smaller and smaller.
Yep.
Yeah.
And just using the window motif, and then draw anything. And there you can see in that first panel, already Marv's getting more comfortable with the idea that, the mom may be small. She may be a tiny woman or whatever with her little night dress that she's wearing with the little
outfit. Yeah.
Marv is a giant, it's a giant boy for this little mom.
Yeah. Oh, he must have been a handful. And then this.
Oh.
Right. Just that's such a brilliant composition, such a simple idea, but it looks so good. It reminds me of, do you remember the first Phantom Menace Star Wars poster where Anakin's standing in front of the building and it's the shadow of Darth Vader up on the wall?
It was a building or it was a giant stone or something like that. But yeah, we saw that on the ranch. We're like, oh my God, that was super cool. Because there's this little boy with obviously Darth Vader's shadow behind him. The graphic of it was really good. I'm actually looking for that. Is that I don't know if I have that page in my collection.
The version I used, I think, is a very old version. Because
I've never seen that one before. It's a great page, and it's greatly symbolic, and it also helps tell actually where the story's going to go.
Right.
With the bell tower and everything.
It does, right? Like that is the bell that he's standing on top of, casting his shadow on it.
That's super cool usage and very graphic and super arty. It's just a piece of artwork now. It's not anything else.
I don't know if this is hang on a second, Scott, here, look up. This is in the trade paperback I have, which is a newer edition. That's the version.
For number 4?
Where it's just a small picture of him.
Oh, yeah. That's the one I've got.
Yeah. So I think I think he changed it for this trade paperback or this edition, and this might have been the way it originally was. I can't remember.
Yeah, it seems like it's new because, again, that's such an arty piece. Again, to me, he didn't, push that kind of stuff as much until he got to the second or third volume of his city stories, where he was really letting the art almost countermand other things about, although we've already acknowledged that this is a storytelling in a certain way where he's talking about the bell and whatnot that has to do with where Marv is going with the story. But he did that more, especially I remember noticing that in starting of the Dame to Kill For.
Right.
Remember there was a woman who was diving into the water and that kind of stuff. He was taking the pictures of it at the beginning, I think. A lot of those were just like, that's just a really cool art piece. I don't care if it's in the story or not, or what's going on with this whole thing. It's just super freaking arty of what's there, what's not there, the high contrast, the layout, the posing, everything about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what that is, Scott? I'm just going to go ahead and say it. That's foreshadowing. Thank you. I'll be here all week.
Yes, it is.
Right. And I love he's got the sleeves rolled up, old 80s style, early 90s. He just wears a trench coat so well. Just those huge areas of empty space, of just undetailed white, and then the textures of the sleeves and the cloth. It's great.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
And this is a totally different vocabulary than what he'd been playing with, you know, again, like in Daredevil or any of those things. I mean, there's hints of it maybe in those earlier books, but what he's doing with it here is, you know, miles different from any of that stuff.
Well, I mean, you always play, when you're composing any kind of picture, you play with the negative space, but in this one, he was really using the negative space as a weapon. He was really using it to drive, almost like words, like exclamation points, to just drive stuff home.
Do you know where you got these scans from?
Yeah, I think they're from the DPH.
Okay.
Yeah. And once again, there's that. Right. And so what's funny to me is, like, when he chooses to throw in every brick, makes you feel, it makes you feel trapped, and it sucks you. It's a sense of vertigo. Yeah.
This was another one like that breaking out of the window thing that I found a couple usages for it later. I was like, oh, can I do this? Well, Frank did it here. I'm going to try it and see what I can do. Now, mine all got, you know, colored or different things with a regular Marvel or DC book, whatever I was doing at the time. Right. But just the idea to use all of that to pull you in like that, in that really strong perspective pattern of doing it, was so fun, so cool.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you have, there's just a cool shot of, so Darrow doing.
I thought it was important for us to put in some other thing like the Brachio thing, that to show that I think there had been some sort of connection to where Frank saw Darrow's work and was like, oh my God, this is really cool. Mm-hmm. I could do something in this family of work, right, in my own way of doing it, but do something related to this. Again, I don't have to do superheroes. I don't have to do these other things. Boy, I could really, you know, play this up.
Yeah, which is, I mean, what other books were really popular in '91 at the time?
Well, see, that's the thing about it too, is that I don't know if Ronin was that much of a hit for him, but I don't think Hardboiled was a big hit at the time. I remember seeing it around, but actually I didn't get a copy myself. I wasn't sold on Darrow yet at that point. I was such a little Marvel DC guy or whatever.
Oh,
I hadn't experimented enough yet.
I have a first print. It might be close at hand. I have a first, one of the big ones of Jeff Darrow of Hardboiled.
You were a much smarter fan than I was.
Well, I have the individual issues, and then at some point, I got this bad boy.
Yeah,
and it's the opposite of of what Frank is doing. I almost wonder if he saw what Jeff was doing and he went, you know what? I think I can do that different. Let me try let me do the antithesis of Darrow.
Well, one of the things I actually think that he did get from there, besides, you know, the idea of playing with a trench coat hero or that kind of thing, but there's such inherent violence and almost gore sometimes with the Darrow stuff, right? I mean, I know he deals with it almost clinically the way he draws it,
right?
But you know, like I don't have it, and I going by memory, but I thought there were times with that main guy from Hardboiled that he had gone through a window or something or other, and he's just standing there with like shards of glass sticking out of him, right, all over the place.
Yeah, glass, batteries, pieces of hamburger, you know, straw, like whatever thing gets stuck. He draws everything.
But it was that visceral nature of like, oh my God, this guy just had to go through this horrible, tormenting thing. That seemed to me, if I'm reading it right, really made an impression on Frank, where he's like, oh. And then we get Marv, who gets nicked all over and has the band-aids or whatnot. But I want to say there's other scenes with Marv or that kind of stuff where, yeah, I mean, it's almost like a Hellboy thing too, where, you know, Mike can draw Hellboy where he's got 16 arrows sticking out of his back.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Frank
I
definitely
like the
makes
primal stuff if anybody's watching that.
Oh, yeah, it does have a very primal feel to it, right? Because I think Marv is, I mean, if you want to analyze it, which is what we're doing, I think Marv definitely represents that entire that unstoppable that crazy focus that whether it's all a dream or it's all a psychotic break, or if he's just that driven and he's just that tough.
It's been commented very many times that either Frank or whoever else talking about Marv and who he is or whatever as a character, that, you know, he's very much, he's a man out of time. He's a Conan. He's, you know, this berserker warrior from ages past who was born in this time when he wasn't allowed to be the berserker that made him a criminal or made him an outcast in the village kind of a thing.
Well, I mean, Frank even talks about it. In a different age, he would have been a king.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was even in the book. Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And I always thought this was kind of a funny call out to his Wolverine stuff, right?
A little bit of parody, comedy, poking fun at some stuff here. Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Like saying, I've moved on from Wolverine. Let me just make that clear.
Which really was never his baby to begin with, but he did that miniseries and it went over so well.
Right.
Yeah. I guess I should have mentioned that in there too, of all of his wins that he's gotten, because that Wolverine miniseries was a huge win.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly catapulted. Like, I'd never seen his work before. I remember when I was a kid, those issues were coming out while we were driving cross country. And so it took us a long time to get from one coast to the other. But getting those issues at the 7-Elevens and being like, oh, then here's another one. Right? I was like, oh, this cover is so crazy. This book is so crazy.
And literally, Frank would do that to you with these things. You get the extra, you're like, oh.
Jeez.
In fact, somewhere over here, I have one of the last ones I bought of his stuff. The first panel is reminding me of this, where he's actually showing, you know, like what, 20 people, 25 people in that bar scene.
Well, this is our first crowd scene.
Yeah, that's pretty labor intensive for him. And well, there's the brick thing in comparison to what he was doing later on. The brick stuff in here was very different. He was still eliminating some details and things, but, you know, it was the very graphic quality. Although in this one too, I think it's winter as well, he's doing a lot of spattering things. But I do like it when he does take those time on some of those pages to do, you know, a large cast of people all sitting in a room or something like that. Maybe I'm remembering this wrong. Oh, this was kind of like it.
Oh yeah.
Because we're in the very graphic room.
Hang on a second.
And there's all those people sitting around the end of it.
Let me focus on that a little bit more. Nope, that's not what I want. No one needs to see my face. That is not. Here we go. Let's try this.
Shebang.
Bang.
So I mean, there's the graphic, but then we are seeing all these people sitting down. It is almost that. It's not quite the complete down shot that we were talking about before. It's a little bit different. This to me is more like a down shot, like John Byrne would have done at the time.
Right.
So you felt the perspective, but it was a little more, I don't know, Steven Spielbergish or something. It was a little more comfortable with the drama.
All right. There. And then.
But wait, you're on the right now, and I'm on the left.
I know. I mess it up.
It's all right. But even there, that's so cool.
Right. Well, I love that he goes from this. I mean, and in the newer versions, the newer publications, there's he added Nancy shots, but and the stuff I scanned, it goes from this to this beautiful solo shot of her.
What a great artistic shot.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we're also romanticizing, you know, the weird kind of thing of a strip bar or whatever going on.
Right.
So there's a whole bunch of that involved with this. But in some ways, it is Frank sticking true to this story of this Conan man.
I mean, it's Sin City.
Dirty part of town. Yeah, it's Sin City.
I know it's based in City and not Vegas, but there's certainly there's an underground feel to it. There's a grimy, gritty feel to it.
Yep.
Yeah, that shadow. So once again, Argentina. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Maxine.
So here's, I just love, look at that shape, look at that silhouette of his nose, right? That almost shadow, graphic of his nose.
That's pushing it to like Dick Tracy levels.
Exactly, right? So, and then going back to here.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's hints of it here, right? But if you look at his shadow on that first panel, right, there's hints of it in the shadow. His shadow self, his darker self, right, is more graphic than his physical self.
Yeah.
And then when we get down to here, they are joined and they are super sharp. Look at the point.
He's almost like just a cardboard cutout there. I mean, I know it's the shadow on the brick wall and that kind of stuff, so it is a flat piece or whatever. But and he's pushing it just for the iconography of what you get out of that simple picture. You don't have to stare for a long time. You see the gun, you see it's him, you see the angles of it, you read the words, boom, you move on to the next page. Yeah, exactly.
So I showed that we have the first couple chapters in full, and then we just cut to some of the more.
There's always so many pages we can upload.
Yeah, the pages I just thought were so cool. Yeah. When did American Flag come out? Shaken's American Flag. That was 86, 85?
Yeah, it might have been 83.
But that was when I had first seen someone really use lettering as a graphic. And then to see it here again, I just thought this is it really those sound loud. It feels loud having the image inside the sound effect. It's great.
Well, and he has a staccato nature of the artwork. He has a staccato nature of the blam, blam, blams. And even those little captions that are in there, the dialogue that's going on, they're just like, what does it say there? It's great because it's just, those little punches, very simple. Here it is. He says, first panel, blam, worth dying for. Second one, blam, worth killing for. Third one, blam, worth going to hell for. And then he ends it with amen. I'm like, wow, that's a potent page right there.
Right. It's good writing. It's definitely good writing.
So kick ass, really. Jeez.
Mm-hmm.
And here we see Kevin. We're always talking about that we love so much. It's that perfect marriage of art, writing, the lettering, the graphic of it, all that together, just the one page. It's really just top-notch Frank stuff.
Yeah, his union of pictures and words has always been phenomenal. It's always been the thing that sets him apart.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the best pages. I agree.
Yeah, 100%. Well, because we get all the information. It's a glorious page, and we meet who I think is one of the creepiest villains, in the series for sure, but possibly one of the creepiest villains in modern comics. He's so.
Oh God! Yeah, look at that second panel.
Yeah.
I mean, you can hear that.
Yeah.
Holy cow! How freaking spooky!
He's so haunting. Yeah.
Great.
And there's Kevin. Yeah. So, what was the story you were reading, Scott, about Jeff Darrow?
This was actually, I think, in an interview. It might have been with the Kayfabe guys because they've had a couple of interviews with Darrow or whatever. But I think it was him talking about the story of that. Since he and Frank had been working together at this point, Frank was doing the story, and they were chatting about it, doing whatever as they're doing stuff. And in the middle of it, all of a sudden, Frank says, "Hey, Jeff, can you send me a picture of you?" or something like that. It's like, yeah, sure, whatever, okay. And then I don't know if he knew beforehand or not, but then he found out that I'm pretty sure that Frank used Jeff Darrow as the model for this guy. And if you look now for pictures of Jeff Darrow, you're like, oh my God, that is him.
That is him, right? So if Frank ever asked him,
it's absolute riot that he's this, model for this crazy
right?
word.
Because Jeff's a pretty nice guy. He's notoriously a gentle spirit.
Yep.
Oh, not in Frank world.
But an artist through and through, and I think he's probably one of those guys that's really, really hard to, make mad, to somehow insult him or something like that. He'd probably just, roll and chuckle at all of this.
It reminded me of the story. I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but I'd heard that the bishop in charge of Leonardo's The Last Supper wanted him to finish the painting, and Leonardo said, "Well, I haven't figured out who Judas is going to be yet, and if you want the painting done soon, I can make him look like you." And the bishop's like, "No, take your time. I don't want to be immortalized as Judas."
The guy's talking to him like this. No, that's okay.
Exactly. Yeah,
Whenever you're ready.
Be all right. Be careful what you wish for. Oh yeah.
Apparently, Bill thinks he looks like Elijah Wood.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons. When I saw the movie, I thought they cast Elijah because he looked just like him.
Oh, right. Maybe that's what he's talking about. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But even this fight scene, man, oh, it's so good. Everything he learned from Daredevil or all these other things going on, man, he just pieced in here. This is some of the best action sequences.
Well, one of the things that was really great about this particular scene is that we've seen Marv just go through cops like they were butter, right? Like we've seen him go through windows, through walls. We've seen him just kick easy ass. And then to have this character just sort of dance around him, what made him almost magical. You're like, whoa, what is up with Kevin?
Look at that second panel. Look at that kick.
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah. So much power. And like he adds, suddenly there's a lot more texture. There's a lot more light. There's a lot more.
There is the ground texture and everything.
Yeah, there's a lot more play.
Yeah, he got into that whole field that they're on a farm.
Yeah. That kick. And his creepy fingernails.
Yeah.
Very
super
fast.
vicious.
Yeah.
Oh. Such movement in that first panel. Such motion, such violence. Oof.
That is the sound it makes when a lead pipe hits a skull.
Oh man. Oh, that farm up on top, the perspective. Yeah. And you're right, all that texture that's in there with the farm, the wood and the slats and the roofing and everything.
He definitely gives you the feel of all the different building material.
But again, all super graphic.
Well, and I love that we see the axe, right? Because we don't know yet the horror, right? And Frank has been so good. I think Frank has been so good about showing you what you needed to see. And it hasn't really been that. He's not really drawn attention to it. It's just he's focused your eye. And then I remember reading this for the first time, thinking like, "What's up with this axe? Like, what an interesting choice to put this. Like, why is this here?" And then later on, I'm like, "Oh, that's why that's there."
Well, there's a couple of reasons why it's there actually.
Mm-hmm.
When I first saw it, I was just like, "Oh, it's just this is a mean, scary barn, blah blah blah." Right. Place where he is, okay, whatever going on with it. Then yes, once we go inside the room, there's a reason to find out why the X was there, what his therapist had to go through. But then there's also Marv picks it up later.
Yeah, he uses it. It's that whole with Chekhov. Don't put the axe in the farmhouse if you're not going to use it.
Exactly.
You pick that thing up if it's going to be in the stump. Right. So we cut past a lot of the stuff in the cannibalism and the pieces and whatnot.
Which is sad because that whole thing of them in that little cell, there's such great.
There's great. Yeah, he does. And he does again a lot of the 1 point perspective. He does it a bunch of times in there.
Yeah.
So once again, falling into the abyss, being drawn down.
Really claustrophobic. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just what you said, here's Marv at it again, which makes Kevin, that past guy that he was just fighting, so much more incredible. Mm-hmm. Here's Marv just taking out, 15 cops again. They're all armed.
Right.
Now they have guns and everything on them.
Right, they have body armor. Yeah. This next panel, I mean, I love this action stuff. This is definitely the stuff you could study for hours. But there's this. It's because he adds that extra, because he doesn't have any of the Band-Aids on anymore. He doesn't have any, he's moved past that. And now it is just the clear roadmap of his face that must be like, those are deep, deep grooves.
And the night and day of, who he is or whatever, this yin and yang or whatever, this just vicious beast who doesn't care about anything. Oh, yeah.
It's like the lightning is striking.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, that guy, Marv gets shot a bunch. And it never slows him down even a little bit. One of the things I like about that bottom panel is the reverse silhouette.
Oh, he's got the axe in there.
Yeah.
He's got the axe in panel 1.
Oh, yeah. There's that axe. I love a reverse silhouette, and it's something that I struggle to find a space for, right? It's obviously better for film noir and horror stuff and the right kind of a superhero moment or a romance moment. But he puts the moon up, so high, and it's small up there in the distance.
Yep.
It's just to give that panel so much weight and depth. And there's a lot going on in that little panel.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of action going on down there. But yeah, it's interesting the way that he put it that way to differentiate from the rest, and he really pulled back on it. You mentioned that reverse silhouette thing.
Mm-hmm. Hang on a second. Let me get this and go to that. Oh, yeah.
George. He used to love doing these panels.
Oh, yeah. George did like that.
Silhouetted, but you fill in color.
Yeah.
But they're all getting blasted by something. It's a perfect usage.
It's a good technique. Oh, George. He was great.
So cool.
Yeah. It's a good issue to pull out.
Hey, use whatever's around you. You find this stuff. Me looking at the Sin City stuff, like we've talked about a bunch of times on this. It's like every time we take apart one of these books or whatever we're going through, like, we're remembering these great lessons that we could learn from all this stuff again. This is kicking my butt again. It's making me look, the projects I have to do this week, this next month, whatever next I'm working on. I've got to channel some of this in there. I've got to, amp things up.
Well, one of the things that I do love about doing, I know that, we spend time and we pick a topic and that's the thing that we love, and we examine it and we dissect it and we break it down and we share it with people, whoever is watching the show. But one of the best things about it is that it is inspiring to pull out something, because it's easy to lose skills or for skills to become rusty. And then also, the first time I looked at this book, I was a kid, right? I didn't get it. Like, there's a lot of things that I missed the first time, that I didn't understand why he was doing it that way. And it's now that I've been a professional for a long time, I can appreciate it on a whole nother level. So it's been this, one of the things I like about doing the show is like, I get to be a kid again, and I get to see it as an adult in a new way and get a new education from it.
Absolutely.
Like these scenes, would never occur to me to have, once again, the reverse silhouette and the storm be the thing that because what's important is the bridge is important too, but the storm is a major part of that story, and you get it. The feeling of like, it's almost carved out of the black. Like he did one of those. Did you ever do those scratch boards in high school? Did you ever try that?
Yeah, on the black paper, that whatever it was that had the ink on there that you scratch off the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yes, in fact, in my senior year of high school, we did one of those projects, and this will show you. I did a scratch off of the Phoenix,
and
I sent it with a friend of mine who was going to a convention to give it to John Byrne.
Always a fan.
Which I'm tossed right in the garbage.
Well, I'm sure he has it somewhere in a file. I'm sure he's been given lots of.
I'm sure.
Right. Yeah. Once again, another look with the rain hitting him, and it creates that motion, and the wind is moving his coat, and he's getting splattered, and still you don't see much of him at all.
No, very little of him. He does even, he does indicate the outlines wherever they might have been, but. And I believe this is him. I don't know how crazy whatever he works is, but I believe the system in a lot of this, because he always talks about using the whiteout, is that most of this is just flat out done in black, and then he goes back with the white brush.
He doesn't come in with whiteout.
No, I think it is whiteout. I think it is with white paint or whatnot that he's just doing in all these rain lines and getting that effect that he wants. But
Right.
that can feel very risky when you've got a black drawing like that, and then you say like you've got to add a million lines of rain to it.
Yeah.
Will it work right? Is it going to do this? It's going to do that. Even when I do my Kirby dots and stuff, most of the time I've worked the Kirby dots out, at least generally the shape and spacing of them, on another piece of paper before I do it on the final one. Because I want to make sure it rolls and it flows nice and everything else.
My Kirby dot system now, and I've done it a lot for commissions, it's a lot of fun, is like I'll do the dots themselves and I'll make those as interesting as I can, and I'll go in with whiteout and then add just as much of like almost a stippling effect with the little white energy things and go in and play with that, just to give that the sense of back and forth of vibration.
Yep.
Oh, there it is, his favorite gun.
Lucille.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? I know the name of his goddamn gun.
Right. Well, I mean, he talks to it a fair amount. Yeah. There's these three pages I think are really interesting in as a continuum. There's this where he's walking.
Yeah.
Right. This one where he's definitely deciding. Where is it? Hang on.
Yep.
Right. The Dark Night of the Soul. And then this one here where he actually is taking that leap.
But I'll admit that those, including that one too. I love that last panel.
Yeah.
That they were those are a bit of a stretch for me. Those took me a couple different attempts. I don't think I read those actually, like the first time I read the book, because it's so much text compared to what I've been used to with the story.
Right.
I wasn't prepared for it. I was used to the frenetic pace of everything going on with it. So this really slows it down.
Well, yeah, this is definitely to make you stop and pause and catch your breath and really absorb what's happening and engage with the text in a way. Lucille's therapist. Is Gladys the gun?
No, the guy says, yeah, it's Gladys is the gun.
Gladys
Really?
is the gun.
I had it reversed then. Okay.
Yeah.
So I didn't know the name of the guy.
Well, I mean, you know the name of the therapist. It's close. They were all friends. Yeah. In the mirror. This is one of my favorite pages in the whole series.
That's an excellent page.
Yeah. I don't know. I've studied this thing a million times, and he takes out so much detail. I mean, this is almost pure light and shadow.
And look at I think there's the one girl who's wearing all the cop uniform. You can just see a smidge of her right in the middle of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
You miss her when you're looking at most of what's going on, but when you stop and you look at her and you see her breast and you see her hat in her face or her arm or the beginning of her hips or whatever going there, if you just look at that for a second, all of a sudden you can see her figure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's so crazy.
If you squint, if you do that squinting game.
Yep.
And this is another one of my favorites, how all of the supplies are silhouetted or reverse silhouetted.
Yep.
They all just pop. And seeing the tools of the trade like that.
No, it's awesome. Great storytelling.
Well, so look at that bottom panel with the trees and the car, right? And if we go back,
actually, yeah, now that you mention it,
there is definitely
it's very much like the Brechio.
Right.
Brechia. Yeah. Yeah, the connection's there. And like we were talking about before we started all this, when we were warming up on the topic, some people are going to, get upset at that or somehow think that that's a negative aspect of whatever's going on. That's every one of us uses all the stuff around us, all the tools that we can find on this stuff. So if this was a branching point at all of Frank using or learning from this stuff, that's what we all wind up doing. There's almost nobody that you could listen here. I don't care, Jack Kirby, whoever you are.
Right.
They don't have the people that they use to springboard from.
It's very difficult. I mean, I think nature abhors a vacuum, and I think art especially does, because art is an expression of self and personality and what you are bringing to the table. But none of us live in an isolated world. We're all trying to communicate, and I think that it just comes out in the drawings. It just comes out in what you choose to draw and why you choose to draw it. And this clearly he loved that guy's work and it inspired him. And I'm glad that it did.
And it fits beautifully right here because the stagnant vertical way that those trees are being done totally offsets that flying car.
Right.
That was one of his like regular motifs and all this Sin City stuff that was so much fun, is that almost none of his cars are on the road.
I would love to see Frank Miller do Speed Racer. Wouldn't that be awesome? That would be such a great book.
There's so many times in all of his books, even in this other one, the Family Values.
Oh yeah.
It's not on the road.
Yeah.
Again, it's in the air.
He definitely has the cars moving.
And I forget, was it in Dame to Kill For or the other one that the main guy, he had a VW Bug. It might have been this one, but it's such an old, terrible little shitty car that he's got that it's always like backfiring in every one of the backfire panels. Boom, the whole car's off the street.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything that, even the props that Frank draws have character, right? They're all telling a little story. They all have a little personality to them.
Yeah. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is this one.
Oh God, Kevin's so creepy.
Here it is.
Oh, hang on a second.
Bang!
So
great.
Yeah, this series, I mean, all the Sin City stuff is great, but like,
he had so
I
much
think this
fun.
one might be my favorite. But A Dame to Kill For is great.
Yeah, a lot of them are really cool, and there's great stuff with them. I really do like the last one, Family Values, a lot. I also really like the that Christmas one shot where Marv goes in and he saves a little girl who was abducted.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that one? It was one of the first ones, I think, when he put a lot of snow in it, because the first Sin City had a lot of rain and everything. But this was an untold tale of Marv. It was just like one 20-page story. And it's just Marv going into a horrible, dank dungeon place with occasionally some guards or whatever that he's got to kill as he goes in. And then he gets to the final last door and opens it up, and there's a little girl in there who's scared and all alone. He picks her up and he goes, your mom misses you. I got, she sent me for you or something like that. And that's the end. He walks out with her.
Frank's good at a tag. I mean, he's a craftsman. All right, so we're getting near the end.
Somebody's saying happy birthday, Jeff.
Oh, thank you. Yep, I'm officially very old. But I still have all my original pieces.
Just barely.
Yeah, I know, right? Still have my tonsils. Still have my appendix. So I lost my sense of wonder a long time ago. All right, so this really, I mean, there's a lot going on, and it really kind of speeds up.
Yep. Now we got that showdown. So now Marv's ready for him.
Right. Now he knows what to expect. And still just gives him the business.
It's just almost like a Rocky movie with the story I was talking about was called Silent Night.
Right.
That little one. Even in this, it still turns into a Rocky thing mostly. It's like, how much punishment can he take for just that one moment that he needs to get the handcuff on him to lock him down for a second?
Yeah.
Oh man.
So quick. So creepy.
But then he's got him.
Yeah.
And he's still battling away. Kevin's not giving up. Bam, 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 bam. Clock.
That's
Oh.
Such a great shot. One of the best punches in all of comics.
It's a good one. And I don't know if we put it in our punch episode.
We didn't have it in that episode. We forgot all about it. We had other Frank stuff. Frank's good at delivering a final blow, but like we missed this one.
But also it's endemic. It's characteristic of this story, of this kind of story and everything going on with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of those weird things to me of time of I found that after stories like this or Dark Knight or Watchmen or whatnot, the mainstream writers of, Justice League or Avengers or whoever it might be at the time, they keep trying to bring that stuff in, going like, okay, when Captain America cracks this guy, his glasses are going to shatter. And that's, him knocking out this villain. I'm like, that's not a Captain America thing to do, really.
Right. Yeah. I mean, cutting this guy's arms and legs off, that's it's a very Marv thing to do.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I mean, one of the things I think is great about this story is, and this is true of a lot of the old Pulp Fiction and detective stories, is that there was a sense that the hero, even though hard boiled, was a samurai, was a gladiator, was a weapon of justice.
Yep.
And I was so happy that Kevin was getting his due here. It was so freaked me out and creeped me out that I'm like, oh, good, some justice has been served.
We actually get a fair amount of justice in this whole book.
We do. We do.
I mean, it ain't pretty, but
panel. Oh.
Yeah. Oof.
Yeah. What's funny too is, like, even though Marv is clearly the angel in this story, right? Like, he looks like a demon. He definitely looks like trouble, and Kevin doesn't. I think it's interesting that Frank swapped those images. Like, the most evil person is the most benign looking one.
Yep. And yet somehow he's the creepiest.
Oh God, look at that.
Ooh.
Yeah. And it's just the blood from the head dripping, and just that, and it's just white. Right? He's just letting you fill in all the details.
Yep. You know, it's funny to me too, looking at this now, is that the Death Blow and other books that came after this that were obviously so influenced by all this stuff. I'm looking at the pattern and the technique of showing the anatomy and the striations of the muscles and everything he does here that he doesn't do for most of the other parts of this series at all. He's got it all right here in this visceral moment because he's finally killed Kevin and stuff like that. But this, to me, it seems almost like one of those pages of, like, you know, if they had to, if this was a thing, this was the page that, like, impressed those guys the most when they were working on Death Below or those other things, because then they could put in this amount of detail and grit into the figure work that they were doing while still maintaining this harsh contrast style.
Right. Yeah, there's a surprising amount of detail in there.
Because here we go back to just, you know, large dramatic shapes and stuff.
Yeah, the heavy, the big squares of black, the big chunks. All right. We're gonna power on through a little bit onto that
heading
dome.
for the conclusion.
Yeah.
Or at least the big last fight sort of thing. These were awesome.
Right. Yeah, I mean, just getting a couple of images like this on the page, it gave you such, like, it sped stuff along, but it also, like, there's a finality coming, right? Like, you can feel it drawing to a close.
And there's an awesomeness to it. I don't know if it's just the perspective or the simplicity of just the two panels in there or just the graphic black and white nature of it. Probably a lot of it, but it gives somehow that extra larger than life figure to it, or something to it. It adds a really dramatic, impressive flavor that the action wouldn't necessarily normally have if you did it any other standard way.
Well, and there's the bell.
Yep.
Right. If we go back to the bell.
Yeah. All that church.
It was always leading here.
Which was another freaky thing for an American comic book to do. I don't know that anybody had played out any sort of pseudo-Christian whatever sequence in any American book that had made them, had used them as villains. Usually we'd done politicians by this point and government figures or businessmen and that kind of stuff, but not actually a church figure. Well,
addressing well, because as the 80s were over and we're moving into a different era, the reason I call it the zeitgeist is, like, it addresses a different kind of corruption, a different kind of villain. And we were still heroes were still fighting crime in the streets, right? Like, they were still.
Superheroes were still much stuck with the standard fare that was going on. This was much more, which is similar to what Frank did with his other books with Dark Knight and stuff, much more patterns of the day now that I think about it, since you're putting it that way. Because we had been having our Jerry Falwells or whoever, those TV evangelists, and they had been, like, publicly shamed for whatever scandals that they had at that time. So it was actually very much flavor of the day that superhero comics, that Marvel and DC weren't going to do that.
Right. So, but if you really want to address the true evil, you have to look higher, right? You have to go to the various kingpins.
Yeah, and this just shows another flavor of another thing that could be, which, like I'm saying, is up till now that I knew of in any sort of comics or periodicals, they really hadn't played him out in that villain piece of the story.
Well, also he's running up the stairs, and I know that there's a very similar scene, if we go way back, where the cops are running down the stairs. So I think there's a lot of motifs that are coming back.
Oh yeah.
And I think that his planning, his storytelling is always, especially when something like this that has to be so concise and elegant, to plan ahead, to put these images and these patterns in your brain. So when you see them again, he's already done the work, right? So your brain remembers it, fills stuff in, and it gives it that extra layer of meaning.
Yeah. And these the nature of these panels and everything that's going on, especially the previous page, but even here too, but they really do imprint on your brain. They're so strong and so basic in a way, because they are just that little bit of information, what you barely need to understand the room you're in, or the expression on his face, or whatever's going on with it. They really do have that extra kind of gut punch of it going on. I remember seeing some Xeroxes of while Electra Assassin graphic novel was put together, and there's that jail scene when Matt Murdock is confronting the guy, and the guy that's in there has like some sort of psionic powers, mental powers, and he winds up attacking Matt Murdock with that. And with the way that Frank portrayed it in there was not only the close-ups of their faces, and they got nosebleeds, and they're making faces of pain and anguish as they were like force of wills fighting against each other. But you also had the bars they were in, because he was in a simple jail cell that Matt got to go into and sit on a chair and talk to the guy and confront him. But the bars themselves were like these hugely 3D dramatic pushing things, just like the stuff here in Sin City. I was like, it added so much impact to this drama of what's going on in the cell.
How big I keep calling Marv Frank.
I did too, yeah.
Right. I mean, I guess it's an honest mistake to make, but just how much bigger he is.
Yep.
I mean, that guy knows the jig is up. There's no way you're fighting Marv. You're not getting out. Right, there's the staircase again.
Yeah, he loves that stairs motif, because that's in Electra Assassin and a bunch of the stuff too, where he really pulls out that whole 3D angle of climbing or going downstairs. Bam, bam, bam. Or bracket. Yeah, he got hit hard that time.
Right. My favorite thing about the story is how they fix him, right? before they put him in the chair.
Yep. These last pages of him, this ending now is one of those where you're like, wow, what an ending. Holy mackerel.
I mean, it was so devastating.
Again, never had a book like that before.
No.
Not in modern American comic books or anything that I'd seen of that sort. I'm sure there's tons of stories from EC and everything else that had already done most of these things before. But that was way before our lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah, from there.
Wow. Even pulling out that motif of showing the skeleton underneath kind of thing.
Right.
That's total cartooning. That's total abstraction. You wouldn't see the skeleton.
Well, the whole story is a bit of an abstraction, right? Like and that's something that he does with this style, since it's not a realistic style. It's just a believable, understandable version of reality that you can play with it. You can make Marv bigger than life. You can make Nancy the most beautiful cowgirl in the world. You can make Kevin this weird, like almost Charlie Brown, sad character, be the most devastating thing, the most challenging thing he faces.
Yep.
Yeah. You really can't say it really did change the way people, I mean, comics are always an open-ended medium. Whoever is working in the medium, only their imagination stops the bound. It's just the paper is the resource. But sometimes I think it's so easy for the culture of comics or the industry of comics at any point to get stuck into whatever people think will sell or whatever is popular at the time. And this really broke that glass ceiling, I think, for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And was cutting edge for quite a while there. I mean, it's still impressive. It's still a tour de force. It's still totally enjoyable all these years later.
Yeah.
Which again proves, how well it was done in the first place. It could be enjoyed, practically generations later.
Yeah. Would you ever want to letter your own thing? I know you've lettered stuff before.
I've done a little bit of lettering. I've certainly done special effects and those kind of things. I've done that a fair amount in some of the books that I've done. But boy, that adds an extra weight.
It's a scary prospect because we're so used to this slick, professional-looking, high-grade quality of lettering, and this lettering here is great also, but a lot of it is kind of sloppy, right? Like it's not.
It's hand drawn, and he's not a trained professional letterer or anything like that. And I'm wondering at different times, on some of these pages, like did that encourage him to cut down to some extra balloons so he wouldn't have to spend the time on it.
Right. I wonder what the final edited version looked like as opposed to what he was planning on writing. Because if you're trying to figure out where to put the word balloons and you're doing it yourself, I'm going to edit for sure.
Now thinking about it too, those pages that have all the extra lots of dialogue and everything going on with them, the pages themselves in some ways are very graphically simple. I wonder if that was a trade-off for him of the feeling at the time. I mean, it works as a story thing and all that stuff too. But this one's very Darrow.
Yeah, that's such a great shot.
But I wonder if that was a bit of a trade-off for him, where he made the graphics of the artwork very simple on that page because he spent so much time lettering and writing out what Marv's dialogue was, all that stuff.
Well, also how much time you're going to spend on any one moment. If you have a lot of dialogue, that's going to slow you down and you're going to be lingering there for a while as opposed to just blowing past something with the action.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. Well, that was fun. I hope everyone enjoyed our little stroll through Sin City.
Dang, that's such a good book.
It really is. So I would suggest to anyone who hasn't read it, which it's hard to believe someone hasn't read it who loves comics, get all of them. They're all great.
He's a new reader every day.
Yeah. Definitely start with Marv, even though you might see more than one of them on a shelf.
Oh yeah.
Get the first trade paperback first, and then spend some time in Basin City. It's such a great place.
It's an awesome another achievement for Frank Miller and for comics in general. I mean, it's crazy or whatever silly that sounds. It was an absolute achievement, and it affected tons of people after this time.
And I mean, let alone that it became a movie and it inspired directors and other filmmakers. It was definitely a flashpoint for creativity.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to put this up, and then I'm going to turn this on, and we are going to say goodnight, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.